Science has profoundly altered the conditions of man's life, both materially and in ways of the spirit as well. No one can predict what vast new continents of knowledge the future of science will discover.
Hey guys, so real quick, we just wanted to put a couple slides together. We've been getting questions a lot when we go on consults or talking on the phone with different coaches. And one of the big questions that always come out or we get asked is, how do you monitor return to play? In other words, when do you give the green light to go for an athlete to begin competing again after an injury? So I figured we'd take this time and go over one of our athletes that we've had this summer, getting him ready for this football season. He is one of the better Texas cornerbacks. He fractured his tibial plateau, torn meniscus, sprained ACL and LCL last season. Had the surgery, spent some time off, decided to pick up a couple games of basketball towards the end of the basketball season on that same leg. Rolled the ankle multiple times. Motor control wasn't there. His quickness, speed, everything was off. After evaluating him and going over what he was giving us from his symptoms, how he was feeling, we decided as a group to remove the hardware. And so that took a little bit of time before we could start working with him. And then by mid-May, we got to start training. So when we think of training and return to play factors and get an athlete ready, generally they're going to fall into these two categories. One, you're going to see strength factors. We want the athlete to be strong on both sides, great intermuscular coordination. In other words, all the muscles working in harmony. We want to see their max strength numbers come up and see them as explosive as they were prior to injury. And on the other side, we want to see how the brain is figuring out movement and make sure that there's no gross compensations when it comes to his technique on skill-based work, when it comes to his position or acceleration or deceleration, and then see how his reaction and perception are to the demands of his sport. Now, when we look at these factors, these are generally the ones that we check off as strength coaches and say, hey, this athlete's ready to go back again. But here at Train Up Evolve, we started thinking, is that enough? So when we look at certain articles when it comes to, hey, what does the return to play look like? And you're still getting good numbers. Hop test symmetry, you're getting pretty high percent of pre-injury levels, muscle strength the same, and they're reporting a stable knee. But 3 years later, 1 in 3 athletes are still playing at a pre-injury level. And so why is that? For us, sport is repeatability. The only problem when we look at gathering data is that, are we gathering data in the time domains that are expressed in the sport? Now, in the weight room, we can look at explosive strength and max strength, and we can look at even force plate data and functional asymmetries within that. And generally those tests are done under 5 seconds. Now, though football, one play might last 5 seconds or under, it's going to be repeated again and again and again. So there has to be an energetic side to that. How can we buffer fatigue, and how is the energy supply? For us, that leads us to our model here at Train Up Evolve. This is how we look at all the problems that come into us, and this is how we evaluate them. Quite simply, just looking at this model, it is energy feeds into structure. In other words, you need to have energy to build specific structure, and that specific structure then functions the way you need it to. And usually when you have function, you have the output and flow right back into the energetics. Now, this first occurred to us when we started putting Moxy on athletes, and we started seeing that when we kept the energetics from recovering and still training the athlete, they started getting sore. But as long as we allowed the energetics to recover and did another hard bout, and then another, and another, and another, they were never sore. And we could repeat training at a higher level more often. And so that began the foundation of how we look at nutrition, training, rehab, everything, and even now in return to play. Like I mentioned before, we use Moxy monitors. These are oxygen sensors that can pick up muscle oxygen as well as blood flow going into the specific muscle. This is our athlete doing a pre-test, I think late May or early June. And as you can see from the first 20-second bout, which is highlighted in blue, you can see a venous occlusion with, at the very end, an arterial occlusion. Now, when we look at the data that Moxy gives us, many people obsess over the green line, which is the oxygen saturation. Now, though it can give you great feedback, when we look at evaluating speed and power athletes and repeatability of these athletes, we want to look at how the brain is organizing that movement. On this test on a bike, a spin bike at a very high intensive effort, we can see a venous occlusion. Now, a venous occlusion is when you crimp or block off the outflow of a hose, and you can see blood volume, as you can see the increase of THB, or the increase in elevation of that brown line go up. At the very end, you can see an arterial occlusion where it just plateaus. Now, obviously volume plateaus when you crimp off the other side and you monitor what's in the middle and you see no volume change. What does that mean? This means that the deoxygenated blood is not leaving the muscle, and if you do an arterial occlusion, that means you're not getting any fresh oxygen into the muscle. When it comes to repeatability, these trends can allow an athlete to fatigue faster. And the damn thing is that if we just do traditional conditioning methods, you might not see improvement. And so when it comes to us utilizing Moxy within the interventions that we use, we obviously use it for monitoring warm-up. We used it for blood flow restriction, because if he couldn't sprint or jump, we still needed to work on keeping the fast twitch fibers alive and well, and that was our method to use it. We used it obviously for strength training bilaterally, coordination training, which is probably the most important, and specifically for what our examples we're using today in that pre-test. The coordination training was vital because we have to improve coordination, because if you can't improve coordination, then you can't repeat it, and your repeatability is going to be pretty poor. We use it for monitoring skill work, specifically on the backside of the summer, getting closer into the football season. His drill work and everything else, we wanted to make sure that, hey, let's do the drill, and the global volume of drills were always done by monitoring using Moxy. And then when it comes to the conditioning, obviously most of the time when people are using Moxy, they're using it for endurance, but we used it for conditioning as well. So into the summer, we look at the post-test. We now get a compression. In other words, blood volume going down. In other words, the muscle just squeezes just enough. It's efficient enough just to squeeze so that blood flow kind of goes in and out of the muscle, and it lasts for around 10 to 12 seconds. Now, when we repeat this test and we do multiple bouts of this 20-second, we can see that sometimes we'll get lucky and we'll make it out to 15 seconds before you have an occlusion. But then as he fatigues, it starts going down. We know it starts drifting back down to 12 seconds, 10 seconds, 8 seconds, right? And luckily, even though after we had, 20 minutes worth of work all strung together in a row, we saw he didn't go underneath, I think, 6 seconds. And so for us, this was a far better outcome. It's not perfect, by no means perfect, but it was a far better outcome than our pre-test. And with the strength numbers and with the other data that we collected, with the inclusion of Moxy, this allows us to see that model in real life and make good decisions. And that's what allowed us to give this athlete the green light. And so that's just a small overview of what we did when it comes to monitoring return to play, like I said before, we want to try to bring tools around that help us with this model of energetics, structure, and function. Thanks, guys.